Imagine this. You open your eyes one morning and something feels wrong. Not in a dramatic, movie-style way, but in that subtle, gnawing kind of way. Like waking up in a room that looks like yours, but isn't. You sit up. You look around. Your clothes are there. Your phone. Your calendar. But the question hits you, like a whisper you've ignored for years. Whose life? Am I living? The job you go to? Did you choose it? Or did it feel like the safe thing to do? The way you speak? Is it truly your voice or just the echo of what others trained you to say? The person staring back at you in the mirror, is that someone you created or someone you've performed? We don't notice it at first because it happens quietly, bit by bit. We compromise our preferences to avoid tension. We soften our truth to be more likable. We say yes when we mean no, just to keep the peace. And then one day, we wake up in a life that feels foreign, empty, even successful maybe, but hollow on the inside. Because the applause we get isn't for who we are. It's for who we've learned to pretend to be. But here's the truth. The longer you live for others, the further you drift from yourself. And the scariest part? You can become a stranger to your own soul without ever realizing it. But not today. Today, we begin something different. Not a rant, not another motivational push, but a return. Back to your voice. Back to your truth. Back to you. And at the end of this video, you may not just see yourself differently. You may finally decide to live differently. Why is it so hard to just be ourselves? Why do we pause before saying what we think? Why do we wear masks, not on our faces, but in our personalities? Where does that fear come from? It goes deeper than social media, deeper than childhood memories, deeper than any one moment. It's evolutionary. You see, we're wired for connection. Thousands of years ago, being accepted by the tribe wasn't about popularity. It was about survival. Rejection meant danger. Exile meant death. So our brains evolved to fear disapproval more than discomfort, more than boredom, sometimes even more than truth. And while the world has changed, that wiring hasn't. Today, we no longer fear being cast out of the village, but we still fear being judged in a group chat, still fear silence after we speak up, still fear being too much or not enough. So we adapt, we shrink, we mold ourselves into what's safest. But safety is not the same as peace. The need to belong, when left unchecked, becomes a need to be liked, to be praised, to be approved of at all costs. We don't just want connection. We crave applause, hearts, comments, validation. And here's where it gets dangerous. That craving is bottomless. No matter how many people approve of you, the fear never really goes away. Because the moment you rely on others to define your worth, you've handed them the pen, and your story becomes theirs to write. But here's the quiet truth no one tells you. You can belong to others and still feel like you don't belong to yourself. That's the real loss. Not rejection, but self-abandonment. So if you've felt that quiet ache, that fatigue from pretending, that weight of always trying to be what others expect, you're not broken. You're human. But you're also capable of returning to yourself. And it starts by asking a new question. Not, do they like me? But, do I recognize me anymore? You probably don't even notice it anymore. The way you adjust your tone depending on who you're with. The clothes you decide not to wear because they might think it's weird. The ideas you swallow at work, even when they burn to be spoken. You call it being polite. You call it professional. You call it knowing your place. But maybe it's something else. Maybe you've spent so long trying to be acceptable, you forgot how to be authentic. This is how it starts. Small compromises, tiny edits, innocent hesitations. You silence a laugh because it's too loud. You pick a safe topic, not the one you care about. You click like on things you don't believe in, just to stay in the circle. And over time, those little choices stack up like invisible bricks. Until you've built a life that looks like yours, but feels like someone else's. We think of control as something dramatic, but most of it happens in these quiet, daily moments. Moments where your inner voice whispers, say it. But the fear of judgment says, better not. Moments where you choose what won't get you laughed at, what won't cause a scene, what won't make anyone uncomfortable. And yet, somehow, you end up uncomfortable all the time. You end up living like a version of yourself, one carefully filtered, polished, approved by the invisible committee in your mind. And here's the cost. You never get to find out what would happen if you just showed up as you. Fully, honestly, unapologetically. Because what if, beneath all the acceptable choices, beneath all the masks you've worn, you were never too much? You were just never allowed to be enough. Until now, there's a cost to being liked. But it's not always visible. No one sends you a bill. No one knocks on your door and says, here's what you gave up today to keep the peace. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces, like the idea you didn't share because someone might roll their eyes, the trip you didn't take because your family wouldn't understand, the person you didn't become because they wouldn't approve. And the scariest part? No one even asked you to give those things up. You just offered them, quietly, automatically, out of fear. Fear of being too different, too loud, too soft, too ambitious, too you. And so, without realizing it, you start trading your truth for temporary safety. You learn the right things to say, the right way to act. You shrink where you were meant to stand tall. You blend in where you were born to stand out. And one day, you look at your life, and it's full of obligations, full of expectations, full of things that look right, but feel completely wrong. You're surrounded by people, but feel unseen. You're achieving things, but feel unfulfilled. Because deep down, you know this isn't the life you were meant to live. It's the one you were approved to live. And that's the real tragedy. Not that others don't see you, but that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing yourself. And yet, buried beneath all that performance, you're still there. You've always been there, waiting, not for permission, but for you to choose yourself again. To remember, you don't owe anyone a version of you that costs you your peace. Approval is cheap, but authenticity? That's everything. The world has never truly loved the ones who lived honestly. Not at first. Think of Van Gogh. He painted with fire in his chest, colors no one understood. They called him mad. He sold only one painting while he was alive. But he kept painting. Not for praise, not for profit, but because not painting would have been a betrayal to something sacred inside him. Or Rosa Parks. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She simply stayed in her seat when the world told her to move. And that stillness? That refusal? It shook a nation. Or Galileo, who dared to say, "The earth is not the center of the universe." And for that truth, he was silenced, condemned, locked away. What do these people have in common? They lost the comfort of conformity. But they found something else. Freedom. The kind that doesn't depend on applause. The kind that burns quietly in the chest. Like a compass, that never lies. See, when you live truthfully, you will disappoint people. Some will leave. Some will mock. Some will try to mold you back into the version of you that was easier to digest. But others, they'll awaken. Because courage is contagious. Every time you speak your truth, you give someone else permission to do the same. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, you create a crack in the walls others are hiding behind. And through that crack, light gets in. So no, you don't need to be famous. You don't need a platform. You don't need a masterpiece. You just need to be honest. With yourself. With the world. Even if your voice shakes. Even if your hands tremble. Because in a world of filters, realness is radical. And when you show up as you are, you don't just change your life. You become the proof that it's possible to live free. Here's something most people never realize. When someone judges you, they're not really seeing you. They're seeing themselves, reflected through you. Their fears, their insecurities, their limitations, all projected onto your decisions, your dreams, your difference. A person who gave up on their passion will always find your passion unrealistic. A person who's terrified of change will call your courage reckless. Someone who's never felt free will resent your freedom and try to shame you back into their cage. But none of that is about you. It's a mirror. And mirrors distort when the person looking into them hasn't made peace with their own reflection. That's why you can't live your life trying to be acceptable in everyone's eyes. Because the truth is, everyone sees you through their own wounds. You can be kind and still be called fake. You can be confident and still be labeled arrogant. You can be quiet and still be seen as cold. You can bend yourself in every direction imaginable and still be misunderstood. Because people don't see you as you are. They see you as they are. And once you understand this, really understand it, you're free. Free to stop explaining. Free to stop apologizing. Free to stop performing for an audience that was never listening to begin with. Let them project. Let them assume. Let them misinterpret your silence and your choices and your light. It's not your job to correct every distortion. It's your job to stay clear in your own mirror, to see yourself fully, to choose yourself boldly, even when others don't. Because at the end of the day, the only opinion you'll have to live with forever is your own. Not every prison has bars. Some are invisible, built from silent moments where we choose to perform instead of live. You know those moments? When you laugh even though it wasn't funny. When you say, sure, even though your stomach clenches. When you nod along while your inner voice quietly begs you to speak up. It seems harmless at first, just a small compromise. A moment of being polite, keeping things smooth. But those moments, they add up. And one day you realize you've become a version of yourself that's always filtered, always edited, always on stage. And the tragedy is, no one asked you to audition. You did it on your own, because somewhere along the way, you learned it was safer to be accepted than to be seen. But there's a quiet rebellion brewing inside you. You felt it. That tension when you laugh too quickly. That fatigue after a day of being agreeable. That voice at night asking, who am I? When no one's watching. That voice? That's the real you. The one tired of rehearsing. The one longing to exist without explanation. It doesn't take a breakdown to wake up. Sometimes, it just takes noticing. The next time you feel yourself shrinking, pause. The next time your truth rises up, let it speak. Because every time you break character, Every time you show up without the script, you reclaim a little more of yourself. And the world? It doesn't need another performance. It needs someone real enough to remind us what truth sounds like. Once you've seen the performance, you can't unsee it. You start noticing where you betray yourself, not out of malice, but out of habit. And that's where the real work begins. Not in burning everything down, not in cutting everyone off, but in building something new, inner discipline and boundaries that protect your truth. Let's start with discipline. It's not a punishment, it's a practice, a quiet agreement you make with yourself. From now on, I will not abandon who I am, just to be accepted by who I'm not. Discipline is learning to pause before you please, to sit with discomfort instead of running to approval, to ask, "What do I want?" before you ask, "What do they expect?" Then comes boundaries, your emotional immune system. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks. You decide who gets a key. You decide what energy gets in. You decide what voices shape your day. A friend who only shows up to criticize. Limit their access. A parent who guilt-trips your choices. You can love them and still say no, because self-respect doesn't always look like a roar. Sometimes it looks like a whisper. That's enough. This isn't selfish. It's sacred. Because every time you protect your peace, you're telling the world, "I finally believe my soul is worth protecting." And yes, it will be hard. You'll second-guess. You'll feel guilt. But over time, you'll start to breathe differently, stand taller, move through life without flinching every time someone disapproves. You'll realize you were never too sensitive. You were just unguarded. And now, you're learning to choose yourself without apology. That's not weakness, that's power. Once you've quieted the noise, the judgments, the masks, the fear, you'll notice something strange. Silence. But it's not empty. It's spacious. And in that space, something sacred returns. You. The real you. Not the curated version. Not the approval-chasing avatar, but the one who thinks deeply, feels wildly, creates recklessly. You start to remember things you used to love, before you were told they weren't practical. You start reading again, not to impress, but to awaken. You start creating, not for applause, but for aliveness. This is the beginning of your mental renaissance, not on social media, not on display, but deep within. You start craving presence over performance, stillness over speed, substance over surface. You stop scrolling for validation. You start reaching for truth. Through books, conversations, quiet moments with yourself. You realize the most radical thing you can do in a distracted world is to pay attention, not to what's loud, but to what's real. You begin noticing your own thoughts again, instead of borrowing opinions. You begin writing, painting, walking, meditating, not because it's trendy, but because it grounds you. You're not escaping the world. You're re-entering it, on your terms. Because when you stop performing, you start participating. And your life becomes art again, not content. No filters, no scripts, just breath, awareness, and an inner voice, finally, free to speak. Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and nothing about the outside world has changed. People still have opinions, still judge, still whisper. But something inside you has shifted. A calm, a certainty, a quiet refusal to let those voices define you anymore. That is freedom. We often think that true liberation will come when the world stops judging us. When they stop pointing fingers, stop telling us who to be. But the truth is, they never will. And they don't have to. Because freedom isn't when no one judges you. It's when you stop needing their approval to breathe, to speak, to live. For too long, you may have bent yourself to fit their molds, watered yourself down to keep the peace, chased applause that never filled the silence inside. But here's the final, undeniable truth. You were never broken. You were only buried. Beneath the layers of fear and expectation, the real you was waiting. Not for the world to give you permission, but for you to finally say, I am enough, even if they don't see it. You don't have to be loud to be free. You don't have to fight everyone. You just have to stop fighting yourself. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to perform. You are here to live. So take that first step, even if your voice trembles, even if your knees shake. Take it, because the moment you do, something remarkable happens. The fear, it loses its power. The judgment, it fades into background noise. And you rise, not perfect, not untouchable, but real, brave, unapologetically you. This is your life. And starting now, you live it for you.